It started like any other morning. The sun rose over the cities, rivers, and forests, painting everything in soft gold light. People were moving through their usual routines. Children were getting ready for school, workers were heading to offices, farmers were checking fields. On the surface, it seemed like a normal day. But high above, something unusual was beginning to unfold. Something that would change the world forever. Far beyond the clouds, space observation teams were scanning the skies. Satellites, telescopes, and radar systems were running their regular checks. Scientists were noting stars, tracking satellites, and monitoring the orbits of known space objects. Then, almost simultaneously, reports began to come in from different corners of the world. A strange object had appeared near Earth's orbit. It was massive, far larger than any human-made spacecraft ever built, and no one had launched it. No government, no private company, nothing. The signals from the object were clear. It was real, solid, and completely unknown. At first, the reports were treated as errors. Equipment could fail, signals could be misread, and human mistakes were common. Yet as more observatories confirmed the same readings, it became impossible to ignore. The object was there, and it was moving in ways that defied normal physics. Analysts noticed that it didn't follow a regular orbital path. It seemed to hover, adjusting its position as if it were aware of Earth's own movements. The more scientists watched, the more questions arose. News of the anomaly reached the highest levels of government. Military command centers, space agencies, and intelligence offices began urgent meetings. Security was heightened. Air traffic controllers were instructed to track the skies more carefully. Military satellites and fighter jets were prepared to investigate. There was fear, confusion, and a sense of urgency. The object was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was not just a satellite, not a comet, not an asteroid. Its shape and size suggested a structure, a warship of unimaginable scale. The world began to notice subtle signs of something extraordinary. Airplanes in the sky were rerouted as military warnings spread quietly. Amateur astronomers started reporting strange reflections in telescopes. News agencies picked up on social media chatter. People began to share images of a bright object, far bigger than the International Space Station. Gliding silently above Earth, panic did not erupt in the streets immediately. Instead, it moved through the invisible networks of fear, across servers, chat rooms, and control rooms. Humanity collectively held its breath. Inside one of the top observatories, a team of scientists was working around the clock. They analyzed the object's signals, trying to identify its composition. It emitted energy, but it was unlike any radiation or propulsion they had seen. Instruments designed to detect electromagnetic waves, heat, and gravity distortions were overwhelmed. The ship seemed to be aware of the measurements being taken, adjusting its position slightly whenever probes were sent closer. One scientist, exhausted and staring at the monitors, whispered, "It's watching us." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the gravity of what they were witnessing. Military analysts debated their options. Should they try to communicate? Should they attempt to approach it? Fighter jets were launched, but as they neared, instruments on the jets began failing temporarily. Comms went silent. Navigation systems glitched. The pilots had to return with reports of strange energy fields that blocked their instruments. The warship did not fire, did not attack, but it made clear it was in control. The mightiest tools of war on Earth were rendered ineffective without a single shot being fired. Governments around the world began to talk in private, sharing intelligence cautiously. Alliances shifted almost overnight. Countries that had been at odds now found themselves working together to understand the object. Political disputes seemed insignificant when faced with something that could render all weaponry useless. The warship had, without any action, already started breaking the old balance of power. Diplomats spoke in urgent tones about unity, but fear lingered in every statement. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued their day, unaware at first. Children played in parks. Market vendors arranged their goods. Workers typed on keyboards, and commuters walked to stations. Slowly, news began to trickle down through social media, news channels, and live broadcasts. People saw images and videos of a massive ship hanging silently above the Earth. They watched reports of instruments failing, jets returning, and governments scrambling. Panic started to touch hearts gently at first, then with growing force. Families discussed what it could mean. Some prayed, some speculated, some were simply frozen with fear. There was a sense that life as they knew it might be over, or at least profoundly changed. Scientists, now working in collaboration across nations, discovered subtle patterns in the warship's surface. It had symbols, lines, and markings that suggested intelligence. There was order in the structure, a design that implied purpose and understanding. Engineers began hypothesizing that it could be a human creation, but far ahead of any technology known today. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who built it? When? For what reason? Was it a warning or a weapon? Each new discovery was both fascinating and terrifying. The world waited. Days passed in tension, but the ship remained silent. It made no hostile moves. Satellites that tried to orbit it were gently deflected, not destroyed. Jets that approached were forced to turn back. Yet, despite its silence, the presence of the ship had already changed humanity. Countries that had fought for decades reconsidered strategies. Alliances shifted. Leaders slept little, and when they did, their dreams were filled with questions they could not answer. It was a new reality. One where Earth was no longer entirely in control of its destiny. Every corner of the world experienced the event differently. In some places, people gathered in public squares, staring up at the sky, sharing a mix of fear and awe. In remote villages, elders spoke of omens and legends, trying to explain the impossible with stories passed down through generations. Scientists recorded everything meticulously, trying to understand. While citizens debated endlessly about the nature of the visitor, the warship, by simply existing, had united the planet in curiosity and fear. Inside government bunkers, military leaders convened emergency sessions. Maps were spread out, satellites were monitored, and teams of experts worked around the clock. They prepared for every possible scenario, yet nothing in history or doctrine prepared them for this. Nuclear codes were reviewed, defense plans reconsidered, but all actions seemed to matter little in the face of an unknown intelligence controlling a massive ship silently hovering above, despite the fear. Some began to see the event differently. A few visionaries, scientists, and thinkers suggested that perhaps the warship was not a threat, but a message. The way it appeared without violence, the subtle movements, and the control over energy suggested intelligence that wanted to be noticed, perhaps studied. It was a presence that challenged humanity not with destruction, but with awe and confusion. Curiosity began to replace fear in small pockets. Though tension still gripped the world, in homes, offices, and public spaces, people watched the skies. Children pointed, adults whispered, and everywhere there was a quiet acknowledgement that life had shifted. A planet that had long measured itself by power, resources, and weapons now realized that it was small in a larger, unknown scheme. Humanity was, for the first time in modern history, reminded that it was not the top authority over its world, and still the warship did nothing. It floated, massive and silent, observing, as if testing humanity. Every attempt to communicate, every approach by instruments, every flight of human technology was met with calm resistance, not aggression. Fear turned to fascination. Fascination turned to obsession. News channels ran non-stop coverage. Social media was flooded with images, videos, and theories. Conversations at dinner tables, in classrooms, and in offices all revolved around the same question. What was it? Who was it? Why was it here? By the end of the first week, the world had begun to change. Governments had suspended certain conflicts. Scientists collaborated across borders, and people in general started to look beyond their small daily concerns. The warship, by simply appearing, had shifted priorities and perspectives. Humanity was no longer simply a collection of nations and leaders. It was united reluctantly by awe, curiosity, and fear. And though no one knew it yet, this was only the beginning. The warship's silent presence was a prelude, a signal that the rules of the world had changed forever. Humanity's future, its power, and its understanding of life itself were about to be tested in ways no one could yet imagine. The days ahead would reveal more, but for now, the people of Earth could only watch, wait, and wonder at the unimaginable visitor that had come from nowhere and stopped the world in its tracks. The warship stayed in orbit, enormous and silent, for several days. People around the world had grown accustomed to its presence, though no one truly understood it. Governments maintained a tense calm. Military forces were on alert, but they knew that any attempt to approach it would fail. The ship's sheer size and the strange energy fields around it made human weapons useless. Jets turned back, missiles failed, and even satellites that tried to circle it were pushed away. It was a silent authority in the sky. It's untouchable and unchallenged. Inside military command centers, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Generals and advisors debated every possible strategy. Some suggested making first contact, trying to communicate in any way possible. Others argued that any movement could provoke disaster. Scientists, engineers, and defense experts were brought together, working day and night. They studied the ship's energy fields, patterns of movement, and surface structure. They hoped to understand its purpose, but the more they learned, the more mysterious it became. Military pilots trained repeatedly, flying simulators designed to test approaches toward the ship. They discussed the strange phenomena reported by those who had flown near it. Comms would cut out without warning, instruments would fail, and the pilots sometimes reported feeling a heavy presence, as though the ship itself was aware of their movements. Each flight ended with a cautious return, and every pilot carried stories of awe and fear. They spoke of a massive shape, smooth yet mechanical, glowing faintly, as if alive. It had no visible weapons, yet it seemed to hold infinite power. Scientists discovered something even more astonishing. The energy the ship emitted was not random. Patterns in the waves suggested intelligence. They detected pulses that appeared to be signals, but they could not decipher them at first. Engineers tried sending coded messages, but the ship did not respond in any recognizable way. Then small changes in its energy fields hinted at acknowledgement. It was as if the ship was aware of Earth's efforts, observing carefully, silently judging. It did not attack or threaten, but it made its control over the situation clear. The world outside the control rooms was changing. People in cities and towns spoke in hushed tones about the ship. News broadcasts played images from satellites and high-altitude cameras. Citizens shared theories about what it could be. Some believed it was a warning from the future. Others thought it was a probe from an alien civilization. Conspiracy theories multiplied alongside careful scientific explanations. Still, everyone agreed that humanity was witnessing something unprecedented. People stopped focusing on minor conflicts or political arguments. The presence of the warship had shifted priorities in space agencies. Teams of astronauts and engineers proposed small-scale approaches. Probes were launched, carefully programmed to approach without triggering the ship's defensive measures. Some probes returned, damaged but intact, with images showing vast surfaces, intricate designs, and a structure far beyond human capability. Other probes never returned. The results confirmed a simple truth. The ship was aware of its surroundings, and it had technologies that humans could not yet understand. On Earth, governments began to adjust policies quietly. Weapons programs were reevaluated, and efforts shifted toward observation, understanding, and communication. International meetings were held secretly. The nations realized that old rivalries mattered less when faced with an object that could neutralize all conventional weapons. Diplomats spoke about collaboration, sharing intelligence, and creating joint research initiatives. For the first time in decades, some old enemies worked together in real cooperation, driven by necessity and fear. Meanwhile, people everywhere felt a subtle shift in their daily lives. Teachers brought discussions of space, science, and possibility into classrooms. Families debated the significance of the ship at dinner tables. Children imagined what it would be like to live aboard such a structure. Ordinary citizens, even those with no scientific knowledge, were thinking about humanity's place in the universe. The warship, by simply existing, had inspired curiosity and reflection. Touching hearts and minds far beyond control rooms or observatories, scientists continued to study the ship's surface through probes and higher-resolution telescopes. They noticed geometric patterns, smooth metallic surfaces, and areas that reflected light in unusual ways. Analysis suggested advanced materials, possibly unknown to current human technology. Yet there were also subtle signs that the design followed logic humans could recognize. Some scientists began to wonder if the ship had been made by humans, perhaps from a distant future. This thought sparked debates and theories. Could humanity have created this vessel, only to forget about it or send it back in time? The idea seemed impossible, yet plausible enough to demand serious discussion. Military leaders remained cautious. They held war games to test responses if the ship became aggressive. Simulations were run, but all of them failed to find a viable way to threaten the warship. It was clear that human weapons were ineffective. The ship had power beyond comprehension, and it controlled space near Earth effortlessly. Any aggressive action would likely be catastrophic. Despite the fear, leaders understood that patience and observation were the best strategies. The ship was not violent, but its mere existence was a warning that power had changed. The public began to feel a mix of fear and fascination. Crowds gathered in open areas to watch the sky at night. Telescopes became common household items. Social media exploded with videos and images. People compared observations, trying to spot changes in the ship. It became a shared human experience, a global phenomenon that transcended culture, politics, and geography. Fear of the unknown was balanced by awe as humanity realized it was witnessing something beyond imagination. Inside command centers, one particular discovery shocked scientists. A small area on the ship's surface emitted pulses that mirrored mathematical constants known to humans. Engineers and physicists were astonished. It suggested intentional encoding and understanding of human knowledge. Signals resembled data sequences, possibly designed to be recognized and studied. The idea that the ship was attempting communication in some form spread quickly among experts. It was a puzzle that no one could yet fully solve, but it offered hope that contact, rather than conflict, might be possible. Global politics continued to shift subtly. Countries that had been preparing for wars found themselves cooperating on research, observation, and emergency planning. Economies were adjusted to prioritize science and technology. Military spending did not stop entirely, but resources were redirected toward studying space, energy, and advanced materials. The warship had become a force that united the planet in ways that no human leader could achieve alone. Amateur. Scientists and enthusiasts also joined the effort. Universities opened programs for observing the ship, sharing data, and analyzing images. People who had never cared about space exploration found themselves drawn to science. It became clear that the warship had changed not just governments and militaries, but ordinary lives. Humanity's curiosity was awakened, and with it, a new appreciation for the fragility and potential of life on Earth. Days turned into weeks. The warship remained silent but vigilant. Small movements were recorded, subtle adjustments in its position, as if monitoring the planet. Its presence became part of daily life, but always with a reminder of its mystery and power. People adjusted, observing, discussing, and learning. The ship had made no attacks, yet it had proven its dominance simply through existence. The balance of power that humans had taken for granted was gone. The world had changed as time passed. The first sense of understanding emerged. Scientists, military leaders, and thinkers realized that aggression would not achieve anything. Communication and observation were the only tools humanity had. The ship had shown that force could no longer define control. Patience, intelligence, and cooperation were now the keys to survival and understanding. The warship had shifted human thought, redefining priorities and challenging assumptions. Ordinary people also began to reflect on life, society, and purpose. The presence of something so immense, so advanced, and so incomprehensible reminded humans of their own limits. It sparked questions about morality, progress, and unity. Families, friends, and communities discussed the event in personal terms. Children asked why it was there. Adults debated the implications for science, politics, and society. People felt a mix of fear, hope, and wonder. The world, once divided by power, politics, and pride, had been humbled. It was clear that life had entered a new era, one where humanity was no longer the sole controller of its destiny. The Warship, simply by existing, had challenged assumptions, tested patience, and inspired cooperation. It had made humans rethink the meaning of strength, intelligence, and survival. And even though it had not acted violently, its influence was profound, shaping thought, policy, and emotion on a global scale. By the end of the second part of this story, humanity had learned something important. Power is not always measured by weapons or borders. Presence, knowledge, and understanding can redefine control without a single shot being fired. The warship remained a silent observer, an enigma that forced humans to reconsider their place in the universe. It had emerged from nowhere, yet it had already reshaped the world, and the lessons it would teach were only beginning to unfold. By now, the warship had become a constant presence in the sky, and humans had begun to study it more closely than anything in history. The first weeks were filled with fear and wonder, but soon, curiosity became the driving force. Scientists and engineers were determined to understand what they were seeing. Slowly, patterns began to emerge from the signals and data the ship emitted. The signals were unlike anything humans had created. At first, they seemed random, bursts of energy and light that could not be interpreted. But as data was gathered from multiple observatories and satellites, a pattern began to form. It resembled a form of communication, a language that used mathematics and physics in ways humans could recognize. Scientists worked together across borders, trying to decipher the meaning. They discovered that certain sequences of signals matched constants known to humans, such as the speed of light, ratios of pi, and other universal numbers. It was as if the ship knew Earth's science and had encoded messages to show that. Understanding the realization sparked a new level of debate. Some scientists proposed that the warship could have been created by humans, but in the distant future, it was a theory that seemed impossible, yet it fit many observations. The ship's design followed human logic. Signals included familiar mathematical patterns, and its subtle behaviors suggested knowledge of human technology. Engineers studied the metallic surfaces captured by probes and noticed markings that could be signatures or identifiers. The question became unavoidable. Could humanity have sent this vessel back in time, only for it to appear now, centuries or decades earlier than planned? Governments and militaries reacted cautiously to this idea. If the ship was indeed human in origin, it meant humanity had achieved technological heights far beyond current understanding. It also suggested a warning or a safeguard, placed to prevent future disaster. Emergency meetings were held to discuss how to respond. Military leaders were skeptical, arguing that the future was unknown and dangerous. Scientists, however, were fascinated and insisted on focusing on understanding and communication rather than confrontation. Slowly, a fragile balance of strategy and study emerged. Meanwhile, ordinary people felt the impact in their own ways. News channels discussed the possibility that the ship might be from the future. Families debated what it meant for their children, for society, and for humanity as a whole. Children asked endless questions. Adults struggled to explain. And conversations filled with curiosity and fear spread across communities. Social media amplified speculation, but also shared scientific explanations. People began to feel connected to something larger than themselves. A reminder that humanity's place in the universe was not guaranteed. Inside laboratories, teams of scientists developed models to simulate the ship's movements and predict its behavior. They noticed that it did not act aggressively, yet it remained alert. Energy fields prevented unauthorized approaches, and probes were deflected if they moved too close. The ship seemed aware of the human presence, and the more people studied it, the more they realized it was guiding the interactions. It was as though the warship was teaching patience, observation, and respect for forces beyond human control. Engineers also studied the materials recovered from probes that skimmed the ship's outer surface. The metals were stronger than anything known on Earth, resistant to heat, radiation, and energy interference. Some scientists suggested that these materials could hold the key to new technology, but their structure was unlike any alloy or compound previously studied. The designs were complex, yet efficient, reflecting principles of engineering that humans understood but could not reproduce. These discoveries inspired new projects in laboratories worldwide. As humanity tried to reach toward the knowledge the ship represented, as weeks passed, the idea that the ship was from the human future gained acceptance among scientists and policymakers. Researchers proposed theories about time travel, advanced artificial intelligence, and deep space engineering that could explain its presence. The theory was controversial, but it made sense of many mysteries. Why the ship knew human mathematics, why it followed subtle instructions to observe rather than attack, and why it controlled energy fields without visible engines. It suggested a deliberate plan, a warning, or perhaps a safeguard from a time when humanity had reached a critical point in its development. Public fascination also continued to grow. People across continents watched the skies, shared observations, and discussed what it could mean. Artists, writers, and thinkers found inspiration in the silent ship above. Communities held events to study and understand it, not as a threat, but as a challenge to human knowledge. Ordinary citizens felt part of history, connected to a story that would define generations. It was a rare moment where fear was balanced with awe, and humanity's curiosity became a unifying force. In command centers, military leaders struggled with the implications. The warship's presence meant that traditional weapons were useless. Nuclear arsenals, missile systems, and advanced fighter jets had no effect. It was a reminder that control over Earth's future was no longer in the hands of governments alone. The ship acted as a silent regulator, a demonstration of power and intelligence that did not rely on destruction. This forced leaders to reconsider strategies, emphasizing diplomacy, cooperation, observation instead of conflict. Scientists discovered another extraordinary detail. Some signals from the ship contained data that suggested timelines and technological developments. Patterns emerged that mirrored Earth's history, including experiments, scientific breakthroughs, and key inventions. The sequences implied knowledge of humanity's past and present, as if the ship had been designed to guide or protect civilization. This revelation created a mixture of awe and unease. Humanity was facing a future where its own creations, or those of its descendants, were watching and guiding it. The global response evolved. Countries began sharing information more freely, focusing on collaboration rather than competition. Space agencies pooled resources, engineers exchanged designs, and scientists shared insights. Military strategies shifted from offense to observation and defense. The ship had become a teacher without words, forcing humanity to rethink the meaning of power and intelligence. Old rivalries softened, if only slightly, as the world realized that survival depended on understanding rather than domination. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued to feel the impact in daily life. News broadcasts, social media, and personal discussions kept the event alive in the collective consciousness. Students learned about the ship in schools, not as fiction, but as a real, tangible phenomenon. People spoke of the ship in terms of wonder, curiosity, and respect. The presence of something so advanced challenged humanity to consider its own potential and limitations. Life went on, but with a quiet acknowledgement that the world had changed. Some scientists began experimenting with communication attempts. They tried sending mathematical sequences, binary codes, and even simple messages in hopes that the ship would respond. Occasionally, subtle changes in the ship's energy fields suggested acknowledgement. It did not respond in ways humans could immediately understand, but the hints were enough to encourage continued efforts. Patience became a virtue. Humanity was learning that understanding something greater required time, humility, and careful observation. Political leaders continued to meet in secret, planning strategies for every possible scenario. While the ship remained peaceful, They knew that control could never be the same. They focused on long-term cooperation, disaster planning, and technological advancement. The warship had demonstrated that traditional measures of power were obsolete. Survival now depended on intelligence, adaptation, and unity. It was a hard lesson, but an essential one, as the weeks turned into months. The theory of a human-made future ship gained more attention. Documentaries, research papers, and public discussions explored the possibility that humanity had sent this vessel back in time. Questions were asked about ethics, responsibility, and the nature of progress. If humans in the future had built such a ship, what had they hoped to achieve? Were they warning the present, protecting it, or observing it to prevent catastrophe? Answers were unclear. But the questions were enough to change perspectives worldwide. Ordinary citizens continued to share their experiences. Some reported feelings of connection, as if the ship was aware of their observation. Others spoke of awe at its silent dominance. Families, neighbors, and communities discussed what it might mean for the future. Artists depicted the ship in paintings. Writers explored its implications in stories. And scientists shared their discoveries online. It became a global conversation, uniting people through curiosity, fear, and wonder. By now, humanity had begun to understand that confrontation was futile. The warship had shown power not through destruction, but through presence, intelligence, and control of energy. Humans were learning to respect forces beyond their current understanding. Military strategies were adjusted, scientific efforts focused, and public attention was captivated. The ship had become a silent teacher, guiding humanity toward patience, observation, and cooperation. The lessons extended beyond science and politics. Philosophers, thinkers, and ordinary people began reflecting on humanity's place in the universe. The presence of the warship reminded everyone that knowledge, intelligence, and foresight could be more powerful than weapons or dominance. Life was fragile, yet full of potential. The ship was not only a technological marvel, but also a mirror for humanity, showing the consequences of ambition, curiosity, and cooperation. By the end of this period, humans had gained a new perspective. They realized that power could take many forms, and that survival and progress required humility and understanding. The warship, appearing from nowhere, had not only changed the balance of power, but also the way people thought, worked, and lived. It had challenged assumptions, inspired curiosity, and united humans in ways that no force on Earth ever could. And even though it remained silent, its influence was profound, shaping the path of humanity's future in ways that were only beginning to unfold. Months had passed since the warship first appeared above Earth. Humanity had begun to adjust to its presence, learning patience, observation, and cooperation. Scientists continued to study it. Military leaders continued to plan. And ordinary people continued to watch the skies. But something was about to happen that would change everything. The ship, which had been passive for so long, made the first real demonstration of its authority. It began quietly, in the early hours of a calm morning. Cities across multiple continents experienced unusual disruptions. Electrical grids flickered, communication networks went silent for brief moments, and transportation systems stopped without explanation. At first, technicians assumed technical failures or cyber attacks, yet, as reports spread, it became clear that the disruptions were simultaneous across vast distances. The ship above was not simply observing anymore. It was acting. Its influence was undeniable. Military command centers detected a change in the energy field surrounding the ship. Previously, the fields had repelled jets and satellites, but now they interacted with a broader range of technology. Nuclear facilities reported temporary shutdowns, automated systems halted, and even advanced fighter jets experienced interference mid-flight. The ship did not fire a single weapon, yet it demonstrated a power that no human arsenal could match. Analysts realized the warship could control Earth's technology without touching it physically. It had asserted dominance in the most effective way possible, by showing control. Without violence, leaders around the world convened emergency meetings. Military generals, Political advisors and top scientists gathered in secure locations to assess the situation. Panic was subdued by necessity. There was no action that could counter the warship's power. Experts debated the best approach. Some argued for compliance, hoping to understand the ship's intentions. Others feared that any movement could provoke a catastrophic response. The consensus slowly emerged. The only way to navigate this situation was through observation, analysis, and cooperation. The old rules of power were no longer valid. Meanwhile, scientists studying the ship's signals noticed subtle changes. The pulses and sequences that had once seemed purely informational now appeared directive. Patterns suggested instructions or warnings, a subtle influence on human behavior and decision-making. Researchers were divided. Some believed the ship was communicating guidance, while others feared manipulation. Regardless, it was clear that humanity was being observed and tested. The warship's silent judgment was reshaping priorities, challenging assumptions, forcing humans to reconsider how they governed themselves. In cities and towns, people felt the impact in tangible ways. Transportation delays, blackouts, and communication outages were minor inconveniences compared to the psychological effect. Citizens realized that they were living in a world where a single presence could disrupt everyday life completely. Families discussed what it meant for their safety. Communities debated the implications for society, and ordinary people experienced a new humility. Fear was balanced by curiosity as humans began to wonder why the ship chose to act now, what it hoped to accomplish. The warship's influence extended to the military in ways that were unprecedented. Missile silos, aircraft carriers, and advanced weapon systems were temporarily neutralized. Analysts could only watch as the most powerful forces on Earth were rendered ineffective without a single shot being fired. Pilots reported instruments freezing mid-flight, and crews on ships experienced control anomalies. The message was unmistakable. Humanity's weapons were no longer a measure of power. The warship had demonstrated that true control lay not in aggression, but in intelligence, presence, the ability to shape outcomes silently. In the scientific community, a new urgency emerged. Teams worked day and night to decode the ship's signals and predict its next moves. They analyzed energy emissions, surface scans, and probe data, seeking patterns that could provide insight. Engineers attempted to design devices that could interface with the ship safely, while physicists studied the energy fields for clues about the technology behind them. Every breakthrough was met with excitement and caution. Humanity realized that understanding the warship might unlock technologies and knowledge far beyond current capabilities. Meanwhile, the public remained deeply engaged. News outlets broadcast updates constantly, showing images and diagrams of the ship and its effects on technology. Social media exploded with speculation, observations, and theories. People held discussions in schools, workplaces, and homes, sharing ideas about the ship's origin, purpose, and intentions. The event had become a global conversation, uniting individuals across cultures and borders. Fear persisted, but it was accompanied by wonder and the recognition that humanity was witnessing something beyond imagination. In some regions, philosophers, writers, and thinkers reflected on the broader meaning of the ship's actions. It was clear that traditional measures of power, militaries, governments, and resources were insufficient in the face of a force capable of overriding them. The warship had redefined strength, demonstrating that control, knowledge, and patience could surpass violence. These discussions reached classrooms, online forums, and public gatherings, inspiring debates about humanity's future and ethical responsibilities amid the disruption. International cooperation reached new heights. Governments that had long been rivals shared intelligence, coordinated research, and aligned strategies to study the ship. Space agencies pooled resources, combining expertise from engineers, physicists, and mathematicians worldwide. Military leaders focused on defense and observation rather than offense. The ship had, by its actions alone, reshaped global priorities. Cooperation became necessary not only for understanding, but also for survival. Scientists also made a startling discovery regarding the ship's energy fields. Subtle variations suggested that the ship could selectively control technology, distinguishing between military, scientific, and civilian systems. This indicated a level of intelligence and decision-making beyond human comprehension. It was as if the ship understood the needs and intentions of humanity and could choose when and how to intervene. The revelation reinforced the idea that the ship was not a mindless weapon, but a conscious observer and regulator. Public reactions were mixed. Some people felt awe and inspiration, recognizing that humanity was part of an extraordinary event. Others felt anxiety and helplessness, understanding that the old sense of control no longer applied. Families discussed the implications for future generations. Educators introduced lessons about technology, ethics, and cooperation. And communities debated how to respond responsibly. The warship had shifted the focus from fear to reflection, emphasizing the need to adapt rather than resist. In command centers, simulations were run to predict the ship's future behavior. Analysts considered multiple scenarios, from passive observation to direct intervention. All scenarios highlighted one fact: humanity could not dominate or coerce the warship. The only viable approach was understanding and collaboration. Leaders gradually accepted this reality, recognizing that the balance of power had permanently changed. The ship had demonstrated control without violence, teaching a lesson about patience, intelligence, and influence that no traditional weapon could convey. As the days passed, subtle changes in behavior were noticed. Transportation systems stabilized, communications resumed, and electrical grids returned to normal. Yet the memory of disruption lingered. Humanity had witnessed the limits of its power, and the lesson was indelible. Ordinary people, scientists, and leaders alike recognized that the warship's presence was a constant reminder that control was not defined by aggression, but by knowledge, awareness, and strategy. Educational systems adapted. Schools incorporated discussions about the warship, teaching students about space, energy, cooperation, and ethics. Children learned not only about the technology of the future, but also about humility, patience, and observation. Communities held events to discuss the ongoing impact of the ship, encouraging dialogue and collaboration. Humanity had entered an era where learning, adaptation, and understanding were more critical than conflict and competition.